The following is a conversation. It has the features of any conversation, such as imperfectly expressed thoughts, ill-considered opinions, and the notions of several sleep-deprived brains. Try not to get your stethoscope in a twist about it.
Today, we're talking about perhaps the most formative of experiences for medical students, gross anatomy lab. And we'll talk about some new ideas about olfaction, the sense of smell. But first, I want to show you this. This is a Google Trends graph. And for our listeners, I'll say that it's a flat line at 0 from August until about September 4th or 5th. And then there's a lot of activity from basically more than 50 to 100. So that means that it's pretty interesting to people, I guess. Any ideas about what this graph might represent? I'll give you a hint. It does have to do with medical school. Kind of leaving it wide open. I will further say that it has to do with M1 year.
How do I get the smell of formaldehyde out of my scrubs?
Excellent. Excellent. That's an excellent possibility. Okay. All right. Yeah.
Should I drop out?
It's also
It
good.
looks like it's going with exams.
It does have a bit of a regularity to it, for sure. Any other?
I mean, it's just something to do with when do med school interviews begin?
No. It's something that you have experienced in the curriculum.
I was going to say, I spent all my loan money. Can I get more?
Okay. All right.
Hopefully not that first week. Oh, goodness.
You were riding high that first 2 weeks. You had all of the loans in the world. No.
Grade calculator, that's something I definitely did.
Okay. Now, I'll tell you what it is. It's ATP. It searches for adenosine triphosphate. So
just Google searches for that term.
Just Google searches for that term.
Every single college student's biology 1 class that is perfectly
Me this
described.
last week with phosphocreatine.
Yeah, no.
Lies. We did not learn about that before.
And I have already forgotten it. We finished the exam I finished it an hour ago. It's already out.
But it's in there somewhere.
Is it?
It's in there.
I mean, the word is...
It's someday you're going to run across something and it'll trigger memory and you'll at least know
That at one point
that it
I
exists.
maybe knew it.
Yeah, that it exists out there and you can look it up.
Sure.
That's how this works.
Meandering in the margins of medicine, it's the Shortcoat Podcast.
Weird news,
fresh views,
helpful clues, and interviews.
by students, for students.
Subscribe to our weekly show at theshortcoat.com.
Welcome back to the Shortcoat Podcast, the show that gives you an inside look at medical school from the students drinking from that fire hose. It is a production of the University of Iowa Carver College of Medicine. I'm Dave Etler. With me today in the SCP studio, well, she's a stimulus for irritated ocular organs. It's M1, Emily Banowitz.
Yeah. Hi.
His observations create a dissection plane right down to the periosteum. It's M1, Zach Grissom.
Hey.
She knows how to incise to the myocardium of the topic at hand. It's M1 Srishti Mather.
There you go. Good job.
And she presents with a dermis of significant stratification depth. It's M1 Sydney Scotus.
Yeah, you got it.
But if you thought that was all shortcuts, you better check yourself before you wreck yourself, because we're joined today by a guest, Dr. Darren Hoffman, Associate Professor of Anatomy and Cell Biology. He's been here with us at the Carver College of Medicine since 2006 and has taught students in a range of programs from undergraduates to PhD students and students in the health professions. Dr. Hoffman, welcome to the Shortcoat.
Hi, and thanks for the invitation.
Of course. I want to remind you, Shortcoats are always excited to offer you advice about medical school, no matter what your questions are, and to take suggestions for topics that we can cover for you. So what do you want to hear? Go to theshortcoat.com/tell us to make this show your show, because sometimes I need new ideas and I could really use your help. Thanks. One of the central experiences of the first year in most American medical schools is gross anatomy lab. Groups of students work together there to dissect and study anatomical structures on usually donated human bodies, or I guess always donated human bodies if they're going to do that. And you guys have all recently or are still having the experience of learning from these first patients. Dr. Hoffman, would you tell us a little bit about how you got to the study of anatomy?
Sure.
Before we start?
Yeah, I'd like to. So I got into anatomy kind of indirectly, I guess. It wasn't at first something that I thought I was going to do as a career, but I thought I was going to be a med student like all y'all. And that just didn't go great for me in my freshman year of college. Like all of the prerequisites that I was struggling my way through and everyone was just sailing through, I felt like there's something different between me and everyone else in this group, and I'm not sure I really want to compete with them.
Do you remember, was there a particular thing that you were struggling with? I mean, imagine it wasn't sciences in particular.
But no, it was the sciences.
Was it?
Which one?
Yeah, the sciences. No, I mean, like, you can do fine, in science courses, but I mean, pre-meds, like, they just start out at A+ and go from there. At least many of them did where I was going to school. So, and
the ones who talk about it, maybe.
The ones who talk about it, yes, exactly. And when you already have kind of an inferiority complex about yourself, those are the voices that you hear.
Yes.
So I was kind of quick to perceive that there was something different about me than all of the other people around me who had that interest. And that might have been true or not, I don't know. But in the end, I think it was good. It kind of drew me into different pursuits. I was a music major for a while and also found that I was, good but not great in that realm, which is another area where that makes a big difference. And I continued to do a biology major along the way, just kind of as insurance, because I liked it. And, they don't kick you out of the biology major if you say you don't want to be pre-med anymore. Like, you can still do it.
Yeah.
So I took an anatomy course as a junior in college, and it was just like, clicked in my brain. It was like I already knew it. Before I even started learning it, everything just made sense. And then when I TA'd it as a senior in college, I found that I also had a natural ability to explain the subject really well. And so I decided, well, that's just what I've got to do. This is the only thing that I've ever done that I felt was easy and that I was better than anyone else that I knew at that time. So I thought, let's just do that. And so I pursued a PhD in anatomy. And, that was an interesting experience because they don't really teach you how to do that job when you get a PhD. You learn how to do research, and that was very non-anatomical research for me. So I kind of had to hang on for another 6 years for that dream to come true, but it did. And so I've been here since, like you said, 2006.
I had a version of Grey's Anatomy picture book that was cool. Designed more for it wasn't in as depth as the Grey's Anatomy that people would usually think of.
Sure.
But it had a lot of pictures and a lot of fun stuff in it. I always liked anatomy as a thing to flip through this book. In my
did you guys all do the encyclopedias in the library when you were a kid with like the transparency sheets?
Yes.
Yeah.
Love those.
I think that's like an early gateway drug to anatomy.
Is there a current particular focus of your research and your teaching?
My teaching in anatomy is pretty much across the board. I've taught everything in gross anatomy to someone at some point. But I spend a lot of time teaching embryology, and I do some research on...
Ooh, embryology, big favorite among medical students.
I actually really like it.
We control the dosage so that like it's okay if you only have to do a little, right?
Yeah.
Okay, actually, I think that.
So that's good. So I love embryology. I'm doing a study with someone at another institution where we're looking at how everybody in America is doing embryology in med school to try to understand where we're at with that. Like, there's been tons of studies like that about gross anatomy or neuroanatomy, but like embryology is kind of like the forgotten child of the anatomical sciences family. So we're trying to do our best to bring it back into the fold. So that's interesting. I'm interested in virtual anatomy research, understanding how people learn anatomy from things that are not cadavers. So that's pretty cool. And I do some work kind of just getting started building a research program around disability in anatomy.
So studying disability or
studying both the experience of students who have disabilities when they come to learn anatomy, because anatomy is a unique subject to learn. So there's room to explore how the experience of disability intersects with the unique study of anatomy, which is itself often a very physical and complex learning process that requires the use of your body in different ways. And also how we talk about disability and ability when we teach anatomical concepts, because anatomical concepts are often about like, this is how the body works, this is what it does, and you often use language that's very like perfection oriented.
This is normal. This is abnormal.
This is the way it's supposed to work, or this is how God intended it to work. You know, like there's sort of this like slippery slope towards idealizing a certain type of body.
Well, that's a lot of preclinical medicine, right? Is learning
like
the way things are quote unquote supposed to be.
And the abnormal,
yeah.
So are you thinking about like how to express these ideas without
othering people who have a different way of using their body. Yeah. You know,
and sort of encouraging people to adopt that kind of language as they go through their careers.
Exactly. And language is the key word there, because that's what we do in anatomy. We teach you the words for everything. Yeah. And I'm sure y'all are probably tired of learning new words by now, but it's not always just nouns that we learn about. It's also processes and different concepts and ways of thinking. So anatomy feels like a good place to have those conversations for the first time.
Nice and early.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So there's that. You've been working with students for 2 decades. And in your experience, how do students typically respond to their first exposure in the anatomy lab to what it is they're going to be doing? How does that experience evolve over time also?
Most people come in with a lot of anticipation and expectation, because it's kind of like a well-known part of the medical experience, or whether it's PT, dental, I mean, it's all kind of the same.
Yeah.
And they come in either with a lot of excitement and positive anticipation for all the things they're going to learn and like this cool opportunity, and also some fear about being so close and intimately connected with death for a period of time, which is fair. It is not a natural thing to take apart a human body.
Yeah.
It's not a common experience that we do in human life, but we do in medicine, at least in this, in this country, and it's a current norm. Hasn't always been, might not always be, I don't know, but it certainly is well known to students when they come in. So like there's a lot of anticipation, both positive and maybe a little bit of negative.
Are there myths that need to be dispelled early on?
I would say one myth is that it's like a nightmare of bad smells, because like it's actually, there's moments where we do have smell times. The abdomen is not one of my favorite places to be.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it's just kind of like a chemically smell that, and I'll be honest, like I'm completely nose blind to it at this point.
Yeah, I imagine.
But
are you guys progressing in that direction by now? By your last week of it? Your last weeks of anatomy?
No. So then I was like,
maybe 20 years, check back in and we'll see.
Sure, there you go. Yeah.
It's been worse. It's interesting. It seems like it's not always what we're working on that week, but there's been definitely better or worse months at this point, it seems like. And I don't know.
Something that I've noticed, like anecdotally, is like this smell of our donor. I'm not really I'm sensitized to, but I go and study in someone else's donor, and I'm like, whoa, this is a super strong smell.
Isn't that interesting?
Maybe that's how we should factory.
There you go. Make a trip to the anatomy lab.
And I feel like talking with other students, it's like a similar phenomenon, which is interesting because we're all in the same place.
Yeah.
It's just a different donor. So
yeah,
I've been told that people sometimes get weirdly hungry
1,000%
in anatomy lab.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah,
I think that's just because you're working hard.
Okay,
like it is physical effort, and you're standing for 2 to 3 hours, and I mean, I just get hungry like every 2 hours, just regardless.
Yeah,
so
that's real.
And it's the timing of the schedule too. Like it's getting closer to dinner time, because all of ours here at Iowa, at least for the medical and PA students, is in the afternoon. So
yeah, I don't think there's anything that's physiologically happening to you that is inducing you to become hungry. I think it's just time.
Okay. I'm glad we got that out of the way.
So
I was a little concerned.
So would that be a myth to dispel, that formaldehyde makes you hungry?
Because I've definitely heard that.
I've read this.
Have you?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
I heard
the thing.
that.
People say
Oh, that's
all the
interesting.
time.
It made me feel better about myself.
Same, because I would get hungry and then I'm like, am I crazy?
Maybe that's true. I don't know. But then, there's formaldehyde in carpet and in these cabinets, and everything around us is formaldehyde in it. So
well, I'm hungry all the time. So
there we go.
That makes sense.
Or even if it's not the formaldehyde, I definitely heard someone say that one of the chemicals used in the processing leads to hunger.
Well, that maybe we need to do some more research on that. Yeah,
unconfirmed.
They also say
needs
that,
further study.
They also say that saltpeter gets used in a lot of food too, but no, it's not. Doesn't.
No.
Yeah.
Did you have any particular apprehensions or concerns when you were about to step into the anatomy lab for the first time?
Well, so I was wondering what it was going to be like. I don't know if you all had prior experiences. I had a couple of prior experiences with cadavers, and I say cadavers for those ones because I don't actually know whether they were donated in a similar process as the donors that are here at Carver. But I had previous experiences, and I was wondering what it was going to be like to be more involved in it because those were pretty limited.
What did you do before?
So there were a couple trainings when I was in the Navy, and one of them was focused on, or they were both kind of focused on pre-hospital combat trauma and management of that. So the whole body was exposed during those, and some different interventions were performed so that you could see what's the difference between the training models where training mannequins were for doing a chest tube versus on actual human tissue.
Yeah. So you weren't dissecting as much as you were.
Right. Kind of doing interventions
simulating.
as a simulation. And then coming in here, I was wondering what that was going to be like, but it was actually kind of very well managed that we're only exposing in a similar way to a surgical field, the area that we're working on. So things that are more limited in view, like the feet and hands and face are all covered until we get to those units where we're working on.
I was thinking of recently the movie Flatliners. Did you ever see that?
Yeah, it's a classic.
This is a 1990s movie with Kiefer Sutherland.
Julia Roberts
was in it. A bunch of people you might recognize even today. And there was a scene in the very beginning of the movie of students in the anatomy lab. And for some reason, their anatomy lab was in the basement of a old church or something.
It was such a weird, really darkly lit, huge drapes billowing everywhere,
stone arches, and it practically had flickering torches on the walls. And I remember thinking that can't be where they do that. That's not.
No, we have electricity.
Yeah.
and bright lights. It's great.
Very well lit.
Yeah, still a basement, but well lit.
Yeah. And that was for some reason where they chose to do the look to your left and look to your right. Yeah. One of those people are not going to be there by the time you're done. It was during anatomy class. I'm like,
yeah, there's a movie called Gross Anatomy too, where that's in it. I don't know when that became a popular thing to say to people, but
it's very dramatic.
Yeah.
Mood. Yes. I'm going to assume you didn't do that speech. You haven't done that.
No, because it's not true.
We're all
y'all graduate.
Am I remembering wrong, or did Dr. Pizzamenti have us do at the end of on the orientation Friday, look to your left, look to your right, you're going to learn it together?
Yeah,
or something. It was something like that.
Way more positive.
Yeah.
It was way nicer.
Yeah. Anybody else have any initial thoughts about going into before you arrived in anatomy?
Yeah, so Dr. Hoffman already mentioned the disability and what it's like for students who have disability to learn about anatomy lab, and that was one of my biggest hesitations coming into this. And it's because I have something called postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, otherwise known as POTS. And so changing body position or bending over or standing up for long periods of time can cause me to pass out. And so that was something that I was super worried about coming into school, and not knowing how my body was going to react, especially if the smells or just other stimuli, and not knowing what accommodations I needed. It's not something that you've done before, you've said. It's not you're learning in any other learning that you've done in the past. So figuring out what that process looked like, and testing out different strategies that had worked or didn't work, and knowing and how my body was going to respond was something that I was definitely probably the thing I was most nervous about coming into med school, like in general, not just about anatomy.
Yeah, so you did have to do some experimenting and trying to
I figured out like I always have to eat before, and like my water intake has to be like super high in general, but especially before anatomy lab. And like I was really bad about wearing my compression socks because I'm like, I hate the way they make me feel, but that helps with blood flow and circulation. So knowing that like on anatomy lab days, I really should be wearing those, and always having a seat nearby and just knowing like when I needed to take breaks has been, you live and you learn. So
was it an easier process to figure out than you expected, or was it just, you gotta do this hard work and figure it out?
No, I'd say that like I've learned to recognize the signs and symptoms in general, and like it's the same signs and symptoms that are going to apply just in a different setting.
Yeah.
It's just really applying them in a different setting rather than anything else. But yeah, it's fine. Like I've done it and I haven't had any major issues. So,
awesome.
Yeah.
Great.
I was pretty worried about, as you said, confronting death and seeing donors. I hadn't had any experience like that in my clinical work. I'd never seen anybody pass. So that was all new, and I was really worried about how I would react emotionally and downstream of that physically. Like, am I going to pass out? Am I going to get sick? But that didn't happen. There's been some tough moments, but, you know, having lots of people, supportive people around is really helpful. And I thought about this a little more. Like, the more I learn about a region, the better it is. Like, when we start a unit, it's more difficult, but like as I'm learning and identifying and like figuring things out, it gets easier.
Yeah. Like you're engaging your cognitive mind more and less of your emotional animal mind.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, and you had tried something new recently too.
Oh yeah, meclizine. Yeah, that was really good advice. What I said is still true, but there was a limit with this particular unit being the head and neck region.
Sure.
I
That can
just
be
couldn't
tough
fight
with
the nausea, and I had to sit down the entire lab, and it was just getting really annoying trying to like move around. And you know, the best way, I think for a lot of people, but for me too, is to practice for the practical exam, is to get those extra hours in and be in there. And I'm like, I'm not going to make it if I have to be in here for more than a couple hours. So I think that's going to be really helpful.
Good.
Head and neck, often I've read that it's often a situation where people feel a little less comfortable than in other parts of working on other parts of the body.
I think that's true. Obviously, we all like connect to each other through our faces.
Yeah.
So that's a huge obstacle to overcome. Also, most people come into med school and they don't know anything about the anatomy of their head. Yeah. Like they've probably studied their limbs before, especially if they're athletes. They probably know a lot of the names of their muscles and maybe the nerves or bones that are related to them. But it's not common for undergraduates to learn head and neck anatomy in any great detail. So you're coming in at a very kind of instinctive level, and you don't have a lot of that cognitive anchoring to draw upon. All you see is the face of someone who's looking right at you, and that can be really unnerving.
Like you form this like intimate relationship with them as you're going throughout the semester, but you haven't seen like I don't know, something that you see in every live person, and so seeing it and like,
and all of a sudden one day it gets uncovered and you're gonna work on that.
Yeah, it's obviously like, I feel like everyone was had their own like emotional way of processing it, and you just like make sure like you always ask your lab partners, checking in with them, and just making sure that they have that supportive environment, and taking breaks if they need is important.
How many people at a table?
3 to 4.
3 to 4, per day, right? Because there's we do like a peer teaching model that a lot of schools use, where Monday we'll have 3 to 4 students working, and then the next day there will be a different group of 3 to 4 students working on that same donor, and then Wednesday they'll get together and teach each other what they did. So it's a way of kind of extending the resource and gift as far as we can across as many students as we can, but also making sure that the students have as much focused time to really work directly with the donor, because having 6 people around a table or 7 or 8 people around a table at once while we're actually doing the dissection is just completely non-productive.
Or the alternative, having twice as many donors and having 6 hours of dissection a week to move at the same pace that we are.
That would be also not desirable.
Yeah.
Well, teaching other people too is an important part of I think an important part of medical school in general, right? Because teaching, I think, helps cement the learning that you've or the information that you've acquired.
Oh yeah.
I think that's a big part of why teaching each other is so important in med school.
Yeah, because if you're able to teach something, then that means you're understanding it well enough to simplify the parts that are appropriate to be simplified, and really emphasizing the other parts and help someone else recognize like what's going on. So that requires you to be able to explain it really well.
Yeah.
If you can explain it to someone else, then you know it.
Well, and also Dr. Pismenti once told me that learning is actually a social activity, ideally. Mm-hmm. And the more social you can be while you're learning, so teaching other people or talking to other people about your learning, the easier you can retain it. And I hadn't really thought of learning as a social activity ever. If you haven't listened to the show before, listeners, you know that I was significantly worse than Dr. Hoffman at undergrad. And I feel like, having been here in a medical school for 20 plus years myself, I feel like I could do it a lot better knowing what I know now. But anyway, there's a whole team of people involved in teaching students anatomy. Do you want to talk a little bit about those people?
Sure. Yeah. Well, obviously there's the quote unquote teachers, the faculty who are, circulating through the lab, directing what we're doing. And we have an outstanding group of people here at Iowa that are kind of a rare collection of experts who all just truly love the work. But also beyond those folks, we have a donor body program here at Iowa where we're able to, in our own building, procure donors, embalm them, prepare them, take care of them during the course, make sure that their bodies are taken care of, and ultimately cremate those donors and return their remains to the families after it's over. So like that's a group of 4 folks here who run that program.
And these are actual morticians.
Yep. Licensed funeral director morticians who most of them previously had worked like at a funeral home and done that kind of work, and then decided they wanted to do something different with their expertise, and we love them for it because without that group of people, this couldn't work. Like when you do your PhD in anatomy, they don't teach you how to do that. That's a whole different part of the work. So that's really great. And I think the donors themselves are part of the teaching team.
Yeah.
They bring the resource that we all, use and are excited to work with. And beyond those donors, their families agreed to lend us their loved ones for a period of time, which is a huge gift as well. Because for many of them, they're delaying their kind of letting go process.
In our case, a few months.
Oh yeah,
for sure,
definitely.
Right?
Yep.
I
Sometimes
imagine
up to
even
a year.
more than that.
Yeah, and that can be a big deal to know that dad is somewhere else for a while.
Yeah, what a gift.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a huge community.
The ability to learn about anatomical structures and their 3D sort of relationships is the first thing people think about. But are there other less obvious ways in which donors contributions benefit students and healthcare professionals and their patients?
Heck yeah. So there's the subject of the day is anatomy, right? And that's what we're there for, is to make sure we can look at our living patients in the future and see through their bodies and know exactly what's underneath this surface. And that's amazing in and of itself. But the really cool thing about working with donor bodies is that you also get that opportunity to like have some spiritual growth around death, around like bodies in general and the diversity of body types. You'll have a completely different perception of your own body after spending time with a whole bunch of different bodies, not just in the way that we like look at bodies in the world, but like being inside of it. It totally changes your perspective. And every one of those bodies that's in that room that is a different shape or size, that might have different levels of function, is all like a perfect and fantastic human body that was doing a job very effectively for someone for a really long time. And it just kind of like strips away a lot of the BS that I put on myself about my own body.
Yeah.
But it's also a great experience for, like you said, teamwork, It's fun on some days. Maybe not every day. Maybe some days you'd rather be somewhere else. But
nothing's fun all the time.
Yeah, right.
If on the balance, things are fun, then
but I
that's
think
enough.
it's way more fun than just listening to lectures.
Yeah.
You know, like it's something to do. You're uncovering and discovering together. Like you're leaning on other people's strengths in your group who might be, really savvy to one particular thing. That's fun. Like it's technical. Like if you have hand skills that you enjoy using, like it's a place to put that. It's not all cognitive work all the time.
Well, and the other thing that I've learned about learning is that the more senses you can bring to it, the more effective the learning is. And so this, anatomy is one of those things, like you're thinking about it, but you're also, seeing it, you're touching it, you're moving it around. So there's proprioception involved. I think that's interesting.
It is.
How smelling it. I mean, you're just, all of these things I feel like must contribute to the learning.
Yeah.
Which is pretty interesting to me.
A lot of the concepts of like depth or anatomical relationships between structures, you almost don't even have to say it. If you had to get half of your hand in something to find the nerve, to feel it, to touch it, you intuitively know how far away it is, just because of the act of, feeling it until you could feel that string or whatever the thing is that you're looking for. Like it's just the process affords kind of intuitive ways of understanding that would be completely different if you were doing it off of images or even really good, virtual models that you're just not engaging your body in the same way.
I definitely had an experience like that where when we were working with our donor, I went into anatomy lab very much being like, okay, this is going to be a technical thing. Like I was prepared for the academic side of it. I wasn't all that prepared for the emotional implications that came with working with a donor. And so for me, one thing that I experienced was like we were working with our donor and our donor had a lot of fat on them, like a lot of fat content in their body that we would have to work through as we're going through our dissection. And I remember feeling frustrated about that. And then like taking a step back and remembering like this was someone's body, like they lived with that fat and they lived a very long life with that fat. And, we live in a world where that can become something that's difficult to deal with. And so it gave me a greater appreciation about living bodies and how those function, seeing it in death, and also helped me come to a lot of conclusions about how I treat my own living body and how I treat my own self and sort of the narratives I use with myself. And so that to me was like the big wake up moment in anatomy. It wasn't like all of the academics that I'm learning. It's just sort of like this sort of social understanding and this cultural understanding that I came to that was the most impactful for me.
So your experience sort of influenced maybe how you would approach patients in the future.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And sort of just remembering, it was a really good reminder of like, every body is incredibly capable at what it does. And you will find diversity in your patients. And that's a really good thing.
Yeah.
And sort of like, it was a good reminder of that.
Sort of building empathy and respect for patients who don't look like you or
And I came into it thinking like anatomy would be this cold clinical thing because like when you step in the lab, it's not the most fun place. I don't love it. I don't love it.
I feel like Dr. Hoffman might have a differing opinion.
No, I would say I don't like being there by myself.
Yeah, it's freaky. It's freaky.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is, it's clinical. There's like cold LED lights everywhere. Like you can feel a little like dehumanizing sometimes.
I've never been in. I don't know what it looks like.
That's fine.
It's just bright lights.
It's not hard to imagine. It's just a big room with bright like LED lights and
no windows.
Have you ever been in a high school cafeteria?
Yeah. Okay.
It has that feel. Shorter ceilings, maybe.
Yeah,
most
tables,
yeah.
and the tables are never high enough or short enough.
Yeah.
Whichever one you
Yeah,
need.
it's always an appropriate height.
And they somehow got our heights and mix matched the table groups.
Yeah, for some reason I'm with the tallest people in our class apparently, and I'm always like on my tippy toes. I had to get a stool and a block and stand on tippy toes for our last dissection.
Nice.
I had to work so hard for that.
Yeah. Calf muscles are stronger because of it, though.
Absolutely.
We've touched on this already, but you all have to sort of work as a team and collaborate. How does that work in your groups?
Zach and I are lab partners, so
Yeah.
I feel like the first few weeks you're really getting to know your partner's like tendencies and their mannerisms, and like you are spending a lot of time with these people.
Tell us more about Zach's tendencies.
No, Zach is a great lab partner. I feel like I know like one of our lab partners like always has to have this one specific tool, and I don't want anyone to start off like the 3-hour dissection on a bad note, so you always make sure that a tool is there. Or like you can tell when like if you're one person's assigned to like find this one specific structure, you can tell when someone's getting frustrated when they haven't found it. And so that's when you offer to say, hey, do you want to switch? Or like, can I give it a try or something? But that's something that you don't know the first week, and you don't know like what everyone is interested in. If like one person's interested in like this specific dissection, then like of course let them take the reins on that aspect of things. But like day one, you don't know each other. You're
I
just
think you made the observation a couple weeks ago, and I hadn't like realized that when I get quiet, that's fine. That's good, right?
yeah.
Yeah. I'm working through some. If I start asking more questions, I don't know what's happening. I'm looking at lots of trees, and I don't know where the forest is anymore. But yeah.
That's interesting. So everybody works differently.
Yeah. In our group, yeah, I'd say so. Like I have like assigned roles that I do before every single lab, and I like make sure that they're not hard roles. It's like opening the lab book to today's book, and like opening the dissector to the pictures for today, and like that's something that I always do. I'm a very type A person though with the routine, so I don't think other people. Really
we have
do that.
we have that too. Like we have one of my lab mates. One of my lab mates is an absolute ortho bro. Like he was born to wield a hammer on some bones. So he gets so excited whenever we do anything bone related.
Yeah.
And like he was really, really good at like the musculoskeletal stuff. But then when we're doing like the nerves and we're like removing all these tiny little things, we're always like, dude, like please be careful.
Yeah.
Please slow down.
This is not where we bring out the hammer and the chisel.
Yeah, but like when we did have to use the hammer and chisel, he was on that. He was amazing at that. But yeah, we definitely all have our strengths. And since I'm in a group of 3 and sort of how it turns out, I sort of end up getting a side of the donor to myself, which is a horrible idea on my lab mate's part. But like we all sort of like collaborate and like switch around with each other to make sure that we all sort of know what we're doing at the end of it. Yeah.
What thoughts have you had about your own mortality when you do this work?
Maybe not about mortality, but about aging.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because some folks they rode it till the wheels fell off, and
Yep.
I'm working on it.
And
the wheels are a little wobbly.
and just like I always heard like, oh, like your scars like tell a story, and it's like the same internally.
Yeah.
Like the changes and adaptations that come with like, oh, maybe you lose cartilage in your knee, so you start getting like extra bone growth, or it's probably other changes that
Like gallbladder removals and any other like surgical evidence that we find across the different donors within the lab.
Do you guys get a history?
No.
No. Well, I mean, we do with the dissection.
Cause of death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like we can put together our own history, right, when we're looking into
Sure, yeah, as you look at it. Yeah.
Yeah, but nothing more explicit or identifying other than the donor himself.
Did you find anything interesting or unusual that you had to learn about that you weren't expecting? I mean, I know that happens. I feel like I read a story about that in the news recently that I can't remember.
Yeah.
Where they found something that they didn't expect to find, but I can't remember what it was.
So sometimes we learn about structures or normal atypical presentations of things within lecture, and then we start noticing or looking for that in lab, and we realize that the statistic, we have way more of this or that than you might expect just based off of what we learned in lecture.
I'm not sure what you mean.
Yeah, so like branching of the brachial artery into the radial and ulnar arteries typically is down kind of in the crook of your elbow is that typical presentation, and then some people it's much higher up.
Oh, so things aren't always
textbook.
Yeah.
Even in the same body, like one extremity will have the more of the typical, like what you would see in a book, and then the other extremity is like not the same,
different,
which is something that I did not even think of.
And then all the rules become like, well, where's the thing going? Because that's going to be the name, not where it comes from necessarily sometimes, because things can come from different places, but it matters where it's going.
Yeah, I can remember the first time I came across a donor that had like a gastric bypass procedure. And I was trying to help the students figure out like their foregut anatomy, and like nothing made sense. and I was just like frustrated and kind of a little bit confused, but I was like, you guys, we're going to just keep going with this, because I think you're going to learn the normal anatomy and you're going to learn about how this procedure actually works. So this is a great opportunity for us to figure this out together. And all of the other tables in my section were like super pissed that I was like not giving them attention. But 10 minutes of focused energy, we completely figured out exactly what type of procedure it was, like why you would use that type of procedure versus a different one. It would that's kind of like the fun surprises that you get.
I think one of the things that I have heard that I didn't realize before I'd heard it was that, surgical procedures like that can cause a lot of scar tissue in there, more than I would have thought as a lay person. So it gets really kind of messy in there post-surgery.
And it's just physically harder to dissect. Yeah. Things don't come apart freely when there's scar tissue hanging everything up together. So that's why I felt in that moment like I needed to stay and help them through it, because I didn't think that their hands would feel the difference, like where the fascial plane actually was with that level of scar tissue.
I mean, is that a loss for them that they didn't get to see, that they had to see something that was so different that they might not?
You'd think maybe, but you know what? Like, there's 4 other donors like within 6 feet of them that all have a more common presentation. So like that's kind of like you were saying about the cool thing about variation. Like the variation is in the room. Like all you have to do is just take 2 steps, and then there's another one, and 2 more steps, there's another one.
And not a single tutor has said to study your own donor more. They've said, if anything, don't study your own outside of it. Like go and find the thing that you're trying to figure out its relationship in a different donor.
Okay.
That wide understanding and like see everything.
That's how you develop the ability to see the patterns.
Yeah.
If you see the multiple different expressions of the same pattern, like your eyes start to see it differently.
So as we've said, all of this is only possible thanks to the generosity of the donors through the University of Iowa's Deeded Body program. Dr. Hoffman, maybe you could tell us a little bit about how that actually works.
Sure. So our donor body program has been, I think, since the 50s or 60s. I can't remember the exact date that it started, but it's been with us for a long time here.
I'm being told that it's 1965.
Oh, good. Yes. Someone did their research. That's good. Yeah. And so our donor body program works with local community organizations. So our director goes out to like the Elks Club or, the Moose Lodge or other non-animal named social organizations to kind of just, let people know that this is something that we do. We also have outreach in our own hospitals to talk to donors and the potential donors and their families to let them know that this is something they can do if they want to. And so there's a lot of outreach up front to make sure that people know this is here. There's a lot of folks who will their bodies long before they pass, that they are, have been part of the Iowa City community for a long time, and they, really feel great about the hospital and the care they've received here, and they want to give back. Or people who went to medical school themselves and, respect the experience that they had as a first-year student and want to pay that forward after they've passed. So we have a really rich community of donors here. Typically, when someone passes, their bodies will come to us, sometimes through a funeral home or sometimes directly to us. We most often embalm them here when that's possible, because we embalm differently than a funeral home might. And the donors are utilized in our courses here for all kinds of different health professional programs. There are also colleges around the state that utilize donors from this program. There are physicians and other health professionals that utilize the donors for procedural practice, kind of like how you were talking about before.
Yeah. Oh, that reminds me. Yeah. My wife, who is an audiologist, once told me that the surgeons practice on temporal bones, things like that. So.
And that is the temporal bone is such a whacked out little little thing. Like you could never create a model of that, in a way that would be realistic and faithful to how the bone actually responds to a saw, or it's just like what
you
a
could
great
simulate
thing.
it, but it wouldn't be.
No, it wouldn't be physically
like you could
the
imagine
same.
3D printing something, right?
Yeah. So
or the same variability. That's all
exactly
variability
right.
range.
Yeah. So yeah, it's great that the resource for us has been very abundant over the years, and we've been very lucky in that way. One way that we recognize those donors and their families is every fall we have a donor body or deeded body program memorial service where we invite all of the students from the last year and all of the donor families from the last year to come together either at the cemetery where we inter some of our donors, or there's also a local church that supports that if the weather's bad. So it's one of those really, I'm excited for you guys to have that experience next fall, to be able to say thank you to the families and for them to express their gratitude to you, and their excitement for everything that their loved one did.
Yeah, I imagine that can be for some people quite comforting to know that they were able to contribute in this way to the future.
I think so, and it is obvious. They know, like they signed the papers too.
Yeah.
But to see the people who learned, and to hear stories from them of what it meant, I mean, it makes the abstract very real.
So if people are interested in the whole body donation program, I'm going to put a link in the show notes to that. If you want to look that up and figure that out, I'll put some more I'll put other contact information in the show notes. So just the biggest problem that I, as an outsider, see with dissecting cadavers is the limited supply of them. I mean, even with a big program like ours, there's only so many bodies to go around for everybody that probably wants to learn from them. And so there are those who sort of predict that various technologies will sort of take the place of learning anatomy from human donors. And I know you've studied that as well.
So we're at a point in terms of like graphic design and 3D modeling where it's very possible to make complex 3D models that mimic the shapes that exist within the human body. Like, it takes a lot of time. It's complicated. You have to hire a lot of people to do it because you need, for sure, you need a graphic designer to make it look right. You need a computer person to make it all work within a software or hardware or, web-based package. You need an anatomist to make sure that it looks right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because, when I started working on this, when the graphic designers they use like Net or Atlas, as their kind of starting point. They would look at that picture and then they would make it in 3D. And then they would say, okay, Darren, here's what I've got. What do you think? And it's amazing the things that they just didn't notice. The subtlety of this thing goes under that, not on top of it. And that actually does matter, a lot. So it's fun work to do for me as an anatomist. I don't do graphic design work in any way that sophisticated, but because of my one tiny bit of expertise, I had something really cool to offer, that kind of a team. So anyway, you can create these virtual models, which are great, similar to how you can make plastic models that look a lot like anatomy. But with the virtual models, you can deploy them in all kinds of different ways. You can put it on a website where someone has the ability to move things around. You can put it into a virtual reality headset where you can be fully immersed in it and feel like you're actually in it. Yeah. You can use AR or augmented reality where it's like you're still visually in the space you're in, but now there's this huge organ in front of you. Yeah. So there's layers and approaches that you can do with immersion and how far you want to go with that.
Let's take a look at a video that Katie wanted to show you.
Is there anything that replicates the Magic School Bus experience?
I wish. That's on my wish list.
That would have been amazing. I remember that episode so vividly.
Yes.
Where the kid has eaten too many carrots, and so he turns orange, and then they take a little ride into his digestive system.
Oh, I love it.
That's odd. That came up on the last show. Not that Magic School Bus episode, but that issue.
With the carrots?
The carrots, yeah.
That's stuck in my brain because I loved carrots and I was like, oh my God.
Well, let's watch this video. I want to get your reactions to it.
When I was interviewing for medical school, I learned that Case Western Reserve was introducing a new progressive program using the Microsoft HoloLens to teach anatomy. It definitely factored into my decision making.
Walk into the episode form and see what you see.
We've developed a digital representation of both the male and female body. You can easily see details that a medical student needs to know.
I didn't think that any sort of technology could come close to what we're doing now in our cadaver lab.
It was pretty incredible. The way I've been describing it to people who haven't worn the lens yet is kind of like in Star Wars when Princess Leia just like pops up in front of them. Now this human body is just standing right next to you.
You could hear people like in awe and then just saying like, this is so cool.
And what the HoloLens allows you to do is see structures that would be really difficult to see in a cadaver.
Like the lymphatics, like the ductal system.
And I still don't really know what a lymph node looks like in a cadaver. We can't see any of it.
You'd certainly waste a lot less time dissecting things.
And for medical students who don't have that much time, it's very important to be efficient about their learning.
Have a look at the left romentum.
We've done over a dozen trials that have shown positive student outcomes. Students are learning faster, and it looks like they may even be retaining knowledge better.
When I'm doing like my third year of clinical rotations, it's been really helpful for me just because I could visualize it how I did in the HoloLens, and it sticks in our brain.
We're taking this to the next level and adding animation and physiology. We're currently working with new partner schools so that more students can benefit. We also knew that every school teaches anatomy a little bit differently. So we've made tools that allow you to customize the holoanatomy content to fit your needs.
HoloLens is able to distill something complicated and visualize it the way it actually is in a human body and retain that information. I hope more people end up jumping on board.
So that's basically an ad.
Well produced
for Case Western and Microsoft, which I think made the HoloLens system.
The HoloLens technology is Microsoft's, and they developed a partnership with Case Western to work with their anatomists to create the models. And, you know, like, so that was a very unique situation for sure, where there was a lot of resource that was dumped into the creation of those tools. And obviously those don't exist everywhere. So, you know, we're probably not going to try to replicate that here at Iowa. Oh, you know, Microsoft and Google aren't rushing to Iowa.
They're not rushing to Iowa
to try to do the same thing again.
You guys got to take a closer look at Iowa. There were a couple of things said in that video that, I don't know, maybe I'm biased. It kind of got my back up a little bit on y'all's behalf, particularly the comment about wasting students' time. Did you catch that?
Yeah, I did. One thing about anatomy at Iowa is like we only do it in one semester. It's so fast. And so the idea of it wasting time is crazy to me. I would happily take another semester of anatomy to like.
Did you hear that?
There we go.
I'm gonna make that your ringtone.
It'll haunt us in a few weeks.
But like, I feel like it would be a lot easier if it was spread out a bit more, so we could get more in depth. So to me, like wasting our time is crazy.
I find it hard to believe that the creators of this technology were they trying to save time? Were they trying to augment learning? I mean, what was the goal?
I think it depends who you ask. If you ask the anatomists involved, I think there's probably a bit of healthy skepticism about this being a full replacement because they would know intuitively about all those other things that being with the donor gives you. And certainly at Case, they didn't do away with donors altogether. They still use them for part of their M1 fall to, have some initial experiences, get used to the body, understand some of the spatial aspects of it, and then they do much of the rest of it virtually. So they're still, using the best of both worlds as a strategy. But if you ask the technology people, that is absolutely their hope, is that this is going to be like the holy grail that every medical school across the land is going to want to use, and then they're all going to make a ton of money.
Everyone's got to license it, just like everyone's got to pay AMCAS.
Totally.
Yeah.
And everyone's going to have to buy the headsets that they sell.
Only their headset.
Yeah, and then they're going to have to update the software annually for a fee, and then they're going to have to replace the headsets every 5 to 10 years, like when the technology fades out. So like it's getting on a different train. You know, like donor body programs will always cost a lot of money because it costs physical space. You have to run a crematory. That's not cheap. Like it will always cost, but so will this solution.
Yeah.
So it's just since we're at a place where we've been running in this way for a long time, it's very easy for us to continue doing this. New medical schools have a different sort of choice to make.
Yeah. They wouldn't have had the time to build up those relationships that are important to such a program.
Correct.
And it just probably would make more sense to invest more heavily in something like this.
Yeah.
But I don't know. My gut tells me from listening to you today that it might not be quite a drop-in replacement for.
Yeah. No, but as a anatomy educator and educational researcher, like I am so excited to watch what happens with Case Western, and Cleveland Clinic also has some really innovative work that they do with virtual anatomy to just find out like what is possible if the best of the best are trying it, and they've got the resources of some of the biggest companies in America also behind it. What is possible, and then we can ride that wave with them and watch what happens. Yeah, it's kind of exciting.
You'd save a little bit of time for some things if it was like you can throw that on if they have it in some of their study areas and stuff. You could throw it on real quick rather than for us, like it is a little bit of a walk over down to the lab. You gotta, you want to change into your lab
you gotta suit up
and your lab shoes versus you could pull that up. And as it gets more and more sophisticated and detailed, but
it's the difference between Wikipedia and primary resources, basically.
Yeah, but I will say, like, it's still, at least in that ad, very clearly delineated what something is. Things are all separate, nice colors, and everything is, the same shade in a lot of cases within the donor that you're working on. And
yeah, it's all kind of I've seen pictures. It's all kind of beige.
Yeah,
tans, yellows, browns,
and then when you go in and you're in your clinical time or later on in practice, like if you're in a surgical specialty or procedural specialty, like the human body has a lot of things that are going to look a lot similar to each other compared to that. And like, I've seen a lymph node. I don't know about what they're doing.
I've seen a lot of lymph nodes. That's a myth we can dispel.
Yes.
Sometimes
lymph nodes are visible.
Lymph nodes, ganglion. You can find them.
I also think we've talked a lot about it, about like how we have the verbiage of normal anatomy versus abnormal anatomy and sort of what that means, and how that's sort of ableist in a way, and then like how being in the lab gives you this diversity of bodies that helps, at least like in my case, made me a better person, I think. And I think it helps make me hopefully be a better provider in the future. And so just the idea of like 2 computer models, one of a typical, I'm putting air quotes here, typical male and a typical female, that seems very limiting. In terms, so like I would see the excitement of like learning it. I just don't think it could replace working with an actual donor.
Dr. Hoffman, have you seen like the syndavers and things like the synthetic cadavers? So that falls into the same trap of it has to be able to be put back together, and there's a lot of
what's a syndaver?
Yeah, it's like a fully synthetic, life-size model of a body.
Okay, so sort of like the thing that's on Audra's desk. That you take the lungs out and you take the brain out. Is that what you're talking about?
It's a little more dynamic than that. Have you worked with them before?
No, we had looked at some. I used to work with some of the budgeting or ordering for something, and it was like, well, that'd be really, really cool to get, but we just stuck with the like Matman Trauma Effects brand. If anyone wants to look those things up and play with those, which are not as pull apartable as something like a syndaver.
Sure. It's a cool tool. It's also very expensive. If you want to just buy one, like that's going to set you back a bit. And like one tool for a class of 180 students is really not a solution.
Yeah.
So a lot of times when we're making choices here about what technologies we're going to invest in, we're always thinking about scale as a factor. And so here we utilize virtual anatomy technology mainly through web-based platforms. And myself and Dr. Pizzamenti, who you mentioned before, have done work with a couple of different companies who the University of Iowa now contracts with to offer a couple of different platforms that students can use to visualize virtual anatomy, not necessarily with an expensive headset that they may or may not have access to, but just like on a garden variety laptop. So that's I think a great solution. Pedagogically, we try to use it as much as we can for lab preparation. So when students come to the donor table, they are more ready to do good work. But there's also moments where you can use it in the classroom, and sometimes that makes teaching those three-dimensional concepts a lot easier than showing you 12 images and explaining every one in words.
Yeah, I think it's a great resource before and after, but I don't think I would really learn anything if that was the only thing. I took anatomy in undergrad, and it was fall 2020 COVID era. So we only had virtual anatomy, and I can tell you I do not remember a single thing I learned in using the virtual platform. Not only we learned virtually, but class was also virtually, and that was a difficult transition. Granted, that was the best thing to do at that given time, but I feel like nothing can replicate what I'm learning in the classroom now by actually seeing the relationships. And then when I go to learn it again after using an app platform, something like that, I can recall what I saw in lab, but I don't think the reverse would be true necessarily, in my opinion.
Yeah, at least not for you.
No, not for me.
And if you listeners were EMTs before, or did emergency care for the sick and injured, that you're gonna learn a lot more than what those pictures had for you too. So yeah.
I will say one really cool thing that I got to see at Case when I was there a few years ago, looking at the system that we watched in that video, is size.
Which is almost 10 years old. But
that was kind of an older video.
2015 video, I should say, yeah.
Yeah, but it's size. So you can have it be life size if you want, but you can also make it ridiculously huge. So there was we had this great big room, and Suzanne was the anatomist. She was in the video, by the way, and she dialed
the lady
up
with a nice Boston accent.
Yeah, very strong accent.
Reminds me of home.
Yeah. And she dialed up a model, and she was like, okay, so put on your glasses, and there's this enormous body in front of me laying down, and she was like, just go ahead and stick your head in it. And you can just stick your face in there, and she's like, look to your left, and you look up, and you're looking up the thorax of from the inside.
I guess this would be
this is magic.
Kind of magic school busing.
A little bit.
Yeah.
School bus, yeah.
What, given the relatively short time that these guys have to learn from our donors, what advice would you offer future students on how to get the most out of that experience? And all of you can sort of answer this.
Just keep being curious about what you're looking at. You will every time you are interacting with the donor, you will learn something, even if it's not what you expected. So try to maintain that curiosity even when you are struggling. And I think that's helped me a lot because I struggle with anatomy. That is a subject that
it's a lot to learn.
It's something I struggle with a lot.
Yeah.
But reminding myself to maintain that curiosity and sort of awe helps put a positive spin on it. That helps me sort of bring myself out of those depths of despair that I sometimes find
the funk of
yeah.
On dissection days myself, I feel I don't learn very much because I'm so focused on the work to do at hand and the task. But when I find the most learning is either that peer teaching, peer learning day, or you go in outside of lab time. I feel that's when I learn the most, especially when you're looking at another cadaver and you're trying to trying to figure it out. Whereas the days that you're dissecting, at least for me, I'm so focused on the task at hand that I'm not looking at the anatomic relationships or anything like that. But it's that supplemental time is when I actually connect the dots. So giving myself the grace of me going in for one pass, dissecting day,
I don't think you ever really learn anything in one pass. I feel like I'm much more apt to learn something after I've let it
ruminate,
sit for a while.
I think I came in with the expectation of like, oh, you're just gonna like memorize some stuff and it'll be great.
So maybe if you're frustrated that you haven't learned X, maybe give yourself a few minutes for your brain to consolidate those.
Yeah. The more passes, the better. Something that I've learned with medical school in general. That I didn't necessarily do in undergrad.
And the more passes in different ways too. Well, all right. That's our show. Dr. Hoffman, thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Emily, Zach, Srishti, Sydney, thanks for being a part of it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks to Katie Hyam, Kessler, and Zach for putting together today's show for me. Appreciate that. And what kind of plastinated specimen would I be if I didn't thank you, Shortcoats, for making us a part of your week? If you're new and you like what you heard today, follow the show wherever fine podcasts are available. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, all the places. If we're not there, let me know. The show is made possible by a generous donation by Carver College Medicine student government and ongoing support from the Writing and Humanities program. Our music is by Dr. Vox and Catmosphere. I'm Dave Etler saying, don't let the bastards get you down. Talk to you in 1 week. Hi, Shortcoats. Look, life in medical education, life in America, life in the world is often difficult. And I often wish I could help. All I have is this podcast, but in my wildest dreams, you have the support you need to lead a life of your choosing. You deserve to be happy, healthy, and successful in whatever ways you define those words. So if you need support because you've experienced racism, discrimination, harassment, mental health crises, I want you to be able to get the help that you need. And so I'm going to put some links in the show notes to some resources that you can use. But the bottom line is that for what it's worth, I see you. I know you're out there. I wish I could do more. Maybe I can in ways that I don't understand yet or know about. But I see you, and I'm glad you're here, and other people are too. This Shortcode podcast is a proud member of the MedEd Media Network. Inspiration, information, and guidance on your journey to medical school and beyond at mededmedia.com.